September 3, 1658. The man who executed a king now faced an executioner of his own, but this one came from within. Oliver Cromwell lay dying in Whitehall Palace as a violent storm tore through London. While inside his chamber, his organs were failing one by one. His physicians would soon cut him open and discover something so disturbing in his spleen that they could only describe it as looking like the lees of oil. That thick black sludge that settles at the bottom of oil jars. But here's what makes this death truly extraordinary. Cromwell might have lived. The cure existed. It was available. His doctors knew about it. Yet, as England's Lord Protector burned with fever and his body consumed itself from within, the medicine that could save him sat untouched, because it came from his most hated enemies. To understand why the most powerful man in 3 kingdoms died the way he did, we need to go back 9 years to the moment a disease entered his bloodstream that would never leave. 1649. Cromwell is marching through the marshlands of southern Ireland, the ground squelching beneath his boots, the air thick with moisture and the buzz of mosquitoes. He's there to crush Catholic resistance, to impose Protestant rule with the sword. Within weeks, he'll oversee the massacres at Drogheda and Wexford that will stain his name forever. But Ireland will have its revenge in a way no one expected. The fever struck him that October, leaving him, in his own words, very sick and crazy in my health. The Irish marshes had given him what physicians called tertian ague, what we now recognize as malaria. The parasites entered his bloodstream through a single mosquito bite, burrowing into his liver, multiplying in his red blood cells. And here's the terrifying thing about malaria that Cromwell didn't understand. Once it's in you, it never truly leaves. It hides, it waits, it strikes when you're weakest. 2 years later, the disease nearly killed him. From February to June 1651, while campaigning in Scotland, Cromwell lay desperately ill in Edinburgh. The fever was so violent that Parliament dispatched their best physicians from London, a journey that took over a week. Cromwell himself wrote that he thought he would die from this fit of sickness, describing an illness so violent that his nature was not able to bear the weight. Picture this. The man who toppled the monarchy, who commanded armies that never lost a battle, reduced to a shivering, sweating wreck in a Scottish castle. His officers gathered outside his chamber, wondering if they should start planning for a successor. The physicians applied leeches, administered purges, tried every remedy in their arsenal. Somehow, he survived. But survival isn't the same as recovery. By 1655, something had changed in Cromwell's appearance that foreign diplomats couldn't help but notice. The Venetian ambassador, writing in cipher to his masters, observed that the Lord Protector looked pooled in appearance with signs that his health was not stable and perfect. Then he added a detail that seems small but reveals everything. When Cromwell removed his hat in greeting, the hand holding it trembled. This is Oliver Cromwell we're talking about. The man who charged into cannon fire, who signed Charles I's death warrant without his hand shaking. Now at 56, he couldn't hold a hat steady. The tremor was just one symptom of the recurring fevers that struck without warning. Sometimes he'd be fine for months, conducting state business, meeting with his council, reviewing troops. Then the disease would return. First came the telltale shivering, even in summer, even beside a roaring fire. Then the fever would spike, sending his temperature soaring until his clothes were drenched with sweat. The cycle would repeat, cold, hot, each phase lasting hours. What his physicians didn't understand was that each attack represented billions of malaria parasites bursting from his red blood cells in synchronized waves, triggering his immune system into overdrive. Each bout left him weaker. Each recovery took longer. Meanwhile, Cromwell ruled England with increasing paranoia. He wore armor under his clothes, changed his travel routes at the last minute, slept in different rooms each night. Some historians attribute this to fear of assassination, and given that royalists were actively plotting to kill him, that fear was justified. But consider this, chronic malaria affects the brain. It causes anxiety, paranoia, mood swings. The disease slowly killing his body was also affecting his mind. Then in June 1658, just as London sweltered in an unusually hot summer, Cromwell received word that would shatter him more than any military defeat. His daughter Elizabeth was dying. Elizabeth Claypole, Betty to her family, wasn't just any daughter. At 28, she was Cromwell's favorite child, and everyone knew it. While his other children embraced their father's stern Puritanism, Elizabeth had something different about her. She was known for intervening on behalf of imprisoned royalists, using her influence to secure pardons and reduce sentences. She was, in many ways, his conscience. By late July, Elizabeth lay in Hampton Court Palace, her body ravaged by what physicians suspected was cancer. The timing couldn't have been crueler. Her youngest son Oliver had died just weeks earlier. Imagine being Cromwell, the most powerful man in 3 kingdoms, watching helplessly as his daughter suffered through pain that all his power couldn't ease. Contemporary accounts describe Cromwell spending hours at her bedside, praying, weeping openly, something almost unthinkable for a man of his position in that era. This wasn't the Lord Protector, this was a father watching his child slip away. Servants reported hearing him bargaining with God, offering his own life in exchange for hers. Then came the royalist propaganda, The rumor that would follow Cromwell to his own deathbed, that Elizabeth in her final moments had turned on her father, that she had accused him of having blood on his hands, begged him to repent for executing the king. Almost certainly this never happened. No reliable witness reported it, but the story spread because people wanted to believe it. They wanted to believe that even Cromwell's own daughter saw him as a monster. On August 6th, Elizabeth died. Her body was taken by barge down the Thames to Westminster Abbey, the same journey her father's corpse would make just weeks later. Cromwell followed the barge on horseback, and witnesses said he seemed to age years in that single day. Less than 4 weeks after burying Elizabeth, Cromwell's final battle began, and this enemy couldn't be defeated with cavalry charges or artillery. It started with what seemed like gout at the end of July. Nothing unusual there. Gout was practically a badge of honor among England's elite, proof that you ate rich food and drank good wine. But within days, everyone could see this was different. The fever returned with a vengeance. 5 distinct attacks would strike him between late July and September 3rd, each one worse than the last. Between attacks, he would seem to recover, even conducting state business from his bed. These false recoveries were cruel, giving hope to his supporters while his enemies waited to see if he might actually survive. Let me paint you a picture of what these attacks actually looked like. First came the shivering, so violent that the bed frame shook, his teeth chattered uncontrollably. Servants piled blankets on him, stoked the fires higher, but nothing could warm him. Then as suddenly as it started, the cold phase would end and the heat would begin. His temperature would spike. Physicians noted his skin was burning to the touch. The sweating was profuse, soaking through his nightshirt, the bedsheets, even the mattress. Servants had to change his bedding multiple times a night. Then came the vomiting and diarrhea so severe that he could keep nothing down, not even water. A persistent cough developed, bringing up bloody sputum, but the worst part was the pain. Cromwell, who had suffered battle wounds without complaint, cried out in agony. He described feeling like his back and stomach were being torn apart from inside. If you're captivated by stories like this, where history reveals its darkest secrets and the powerful fall in the most unexpected ways, please subscribe to this channel. We uncover the hidden horrors and untold tragedies that shaped our world, bringing you deep into moments that textbooks barely touch. Your support keeps these stories alive. Here's where Cromwell's death becomes not just tragic, but darkly ironic. By 1658, European medicine had discovered a cure for malarial fevers. It was called cinchona bark, or Jesuits' powder, because Jesuit missionaries in Peru had learned about it from indigenous peoples and brought it back to Europe. The medicine worked. It had saved countless lives across Catholic Europe. The active ingredient, what we now call quinine, specifically targeted the malaria parasites in the bloodstream. A few doses could break the fever cycle and save a dying patient. Cromwell's physicians knew about it. They could have obtained it. The powder that could save the Lord Protector's life was probably available within a day's ride of his deathbed. But according to multiple historical sources, Cromwell refused to take it. The word Jesuit was enough. This was the man who had slaughtered Irish Catholics, who had banned Catholic worship in England, who saw the Pope as literally the Antichrist. To accept medicine discovered by Jesuits, distributed by Jesuits, named after Jesuits, named after Jesuits, it would be betraying everything he believed in. Think about that for a moment. You're dying. You know you're dying. Your body is failing. Your daughter is dead. Your republic is fragile. A cure exists. But taking it would mean accepting help from your worst enemies, the people you've spent your life fighting. What do you choose? By September 2nd, everyone close to Cromwell knew the end was near. His valet, Charles Harvey, stayed by his bedside, recording his master's final words and prayers. The night before he died, Harvey offered him something to drink. Cromwell's response was haunting. "It is not my design to drink or to sleep, but my design is to make what haste I can to be gone." Even as his body failed, Cromwell's mind remained sharp enough to wrestle with his legacy. 2 days before the end, witnesses recorded a remarkable prayer. "Lord, though I am a miserable and wretched creature, I am in covenant with thee through grace." Then came the line that surprises everyone who thinks of Cromwell as a tyrant without conscience. "And many of them have set too high a value upon me, though others wish and would be glad of my death." He knew that half of England wanted him dead, that they saw him as a usurper, a regicide, a murderer, and then he prayed for those enemies. "Pardon such as desire to trample upon the dust of a poor worm, for they are thy people too." The man who had shown no mercy at Drogheda, who had signed Charles I's death warrant without hesitation, spent his last coherent hours praying for the people who hated him. The date itself carried massive significance. September 3rd was Cromwell's lucky day, the anniversary of his greatest military victories at Dunbar in 1650, and Worcester in 1651. He had often said that God had marked this date for him. Now it would mark his end. At approximately 3 in the afternoon, Oliver Cromwell died. He was 59 years old. Outside Whitehall Palace, a massive storm was raging. Winds that witnesses called unprecedented for September, tearing through London, toppling trees, ripping roofs off houses. Royalists claimed it was the devil himself come to collect Cromwell's soul. His supporters said it was God mourning the loss of his faithful servant. More likely it was just a coincidence, a September gale that happened to arrive at a dramatic moment. But the storm would become part of the legend, inseparable from the death itself. The very next morning, physicians arrived to perform an autopsy. What they found inside Cromwell's body was revealing and repulsive in equal measure. The brain had overheated, suggesting severe inflammation. The lungs were engorged with fluid, but it was the spleen that told the real story, filled with matter that looked like the lees of oil, that thick black sludge. Modern physicians recognize this as potentially indicating the aftermath of repeated malarial attacks. The spleen, which filters damaged blood cells, had essentially become a repository of cellular debris from years of disease. After the autopsy came the embalming, and this is where things went horribly wrong. Within days, the body swelled and burst. The putrefaction was so severe that the stench became unbearable even through multiple layers of wrapping and a sealed lead shell. The most powerful man in Britain, whose state funeral was being planned as one of the most elaborate in English history, was rotting so badly that he had to be secretly buried to hide the smell. Between September 4th and September 23rd, Cromwell's actual corpse was quietly interred in Westminster Abbey. No ceremony, no witnesses from the public, just a quick burial to stop the stench from spreading. But the state funeral couldn't be cancelled. The solution was audacious in its deception. They would hold the funeral anyway, just without the body. Craftsmen created an elaborate effigy, a wooden body with a waxed face dressed in purple robes of state. From September 18th to November 10th, this dummy lay in state at Somerset House. Thousands of people filed past paying their respects, never knowing they were viewing an elaborate fake. The actual funeral procession on November 23rd took 7 hours to travel just over a mile through London. The empty coffin was accompanied by the effigy. Thousands of mourners, representatives from every level of government. Cromwell's body lay in Westminster Abbey for less than 3 years. When Charles II, son of the King Cromwell had helped execute, was restored to the throne in 1660, Parliament demanded vengeance. They couldn't kill Cromwell, but they could defile his corpse. On January 26, 1661, parliamentary agents came to Westminster Abbey to exhume the bodies of the leading regicides. On January 30th, 1661, they chose the date deliberately. It was the 12th anniversary of Charles I's execution. The 3 decomposed corpses in open coffins were dragged on a sledge through London streets to Tyburn, where common criminals were hanged. At Tyburn, the bodies were hanged from the Triple Tree gallows and left suspended from morning until 4 in the afternoon. When they were finally cut down, the executioner began the grisly work of decapitation. Cromwell's corpse, 3 years dead and partially mummified, required 8 blows to sever the head from the body. The headless corpses were thrown into a pit beneath the gallows, but the heads received special treatment. They were impaled on 20-foot oak poles and raised above Westminster Hall, where they would remain for decades as a warning to any who might challenge the crown. Cromwell's head stayed on that pike above Westminster Hall for more than 20 years, slowly mummifying in the London air, becoming a grotesque landmark. The man who refused medicine from his enemies because of pride, who watched his favorite daughter die while his own body harbored the disease that would kill him, who toppled a monarchy only to have his corpse desecrated by the restored crown, ended as a cautionary tale, not about the dangers of ambition or revolution, but about something far more human, the tragedy of a man who couldn't accept help, even when it meant his own death. The parasites that entered his bloodstream in those Irish marshes in 1649 stayed with him until his final breath, just as the consequences of his actions followed him beyond the grave. In the end, Oliver Cromwell got what he perhaps feared most. Not death, but the inability to control his own story. His body became a plaything for his enemies, his legacy forever debated, his final days a reminder that power means nothing when disease comes calling. What do you think? Was Cromwell's refusal of the Jesuit powder an act of principled defiance or stubborn pride that cost him everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below.